The scent of caramelized sugar and roasting coffee beans was my armor. It was the first thing I built around myself every morning at 4 a.m. when I unlocked the door to the daily rise. My little cafe, my ridiculously expensive dream. The world outside could be gray and unforgiving, a concrete maze of bills and loneliness, but in here, I was a creator. I folded butter into flour, coaxed yeast to life, and transformed bitter beans into liquid comfort. My white dress, a simple cotton shift I wore for coolness against the heat of the ovens, was perpetually dusted with a fine layer of flour, and my long red apron felt more like a part of me than my own skin. Today was no different. The rain started in the afternoon, a steady, relentless downpour that blurred the streetlights and sent pedestrians scurrying for cover. It was the kind of weather that was good for business, driving people in for a hot drink and a moment of refuge. My only employee, Maya, a sweet girl with wide, hopeful eyes who still believed in the inherent goodness of the world, was wiping down the counter, humming a cheerful tune that was starting to grate on my rain-soaked nerves. It was near closing when the old man came in. He was like a ghost, appearing so suddenly at the door that the little bell barely chimed. He was small and frail, his expensive-looking wool coat soaked through, clinging to his thin frame. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp, dark, and intelligent, holding a depth of weariness I recognized in myself after a 16-hour shift. He stood dripping on the welcome mat, looking lost. Maya rushed forward, but I waved her back gently. I grabbed a dry towel from the back. "Here," I said softly, handing it to him. "Come in, get warm. The rain is a beast today." He took the towel with a trembling hand and gave a slight, formal bow of his head. He didn't speak, just shuffled to the smallest table in the corner and sank into the chair, his breath coming in shallow rasps. I brought him a cup of my strongest black tea with a slice of lemon and a honey-drenched almond pastry, still warm from the oven. "On the house," I said before he could protest. "No one should be out in this weather without a little something to warm the soul." He looked from the cup to my face, and a flicker of surprise crossed his features before it was replaced by a soft, genuine smile. For the next hour, he just sat there, sipping his tea and eating the pastry with a slow, deliberate reverence, as if it were the most exquisite thing he had ever tasted. When he finally rose to leave, the rain was coming down even harder. I watched as he struggled to gather two heavy-looking leather satchels. My shift was over, my bones ached, and my warm, dry apartment was calling to me. But I couldn't just let him go. "Wait," I called out. "Where are you headed?" "Let me help you with those," he tried to refuse, insisting he was fine, but his protests were weak. I could see the sheer exhaustion in his posture. I shrugged off my apron, grabbed my umbrella, and took the bags from him. They were surprisingly heavy, dense with what felt like books or papers. We walked in silence for 3 blocks, the umbrella barely big enough to shield us from the driving rain. A long, impossibly sleek black sedan was waiting at the corner, its engine purring so quietly it was almost inaudible. A driver in a crisp black suit immediately got out and opened the rear door, his face impassive. The old man turned to me, his hand clasping my arm with surprising strength. "Thank you, my dear," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Kindness is a rare currency. It will be repaid." Before I could say anything, he was gone, settled into the plush interior of the car as it pulled silently away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the watery darkness. I stood there for a moment, rain soaking through my shoes, a strange feeling settling in my gut. It was just a kind act for an old man, I told myself. Nothing more. The next morning, the air in the cafe felt different, charged with a strange, static energy that had nothing to do with the weather. The sun was shining, but a shadow lingered from the night before. I tried to shake it off, immersing myself in the familiar rhythm of grinding beans and kneading dough. Maya was blissfully unaware, chattering about a movie she'd seen. Around 9, Mrs. Gable from the antique shop next door came in for her usual cappuccino. Her face, as wrinkled and fascinating as one of her old maps, was etched with concern. "Zola, honey," she said, leaning over the counter and lowering her voice. "You had some fancy company last night. A car like that hasn't been seen on this street since the politicians came through promising to fix the potholes 10 years ago." I offered a noncommittal shrug. Just an old man caught in the rain, Mrs. Gable. She took a long sip of her coffee, her sharp eyes studying me over the rim of the cup. In this neighborhood, there's no such thing as just an old man who gets picked up in a car worth more than this whole block. Be careful about the debts you let people owe you. Some accounts are settled in ways you can't afford. Her words sent a fresh chill down my spine, a premonition that coiled in my stomach like a snake. I was about to dismiss her concerns as the usual neighborhood gossip when the bell on the door chimed. It wasn't a customer. Four men stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the cafe dropped 20 degrees. They were huge, dressed in identical, impeccably tailored black suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They moved with a synchronized, disciplined stillness that was deeply unsettling. They didn't look at the menu. They didn't approach the counter. They simply positioned themselves at four corners of the small room, their gazes flat and empty, their hands clasped loosely in front of them. The few customers hunched over their laptops suddenly found their work very important, avoiding eye contact. A young couple who had been laughing by the window fell silent, paid their bill in cash, and scurried out. Maya froze behind the counter, her knuckles white as she gripped a cleaning cloth. The silence was thick, heavy, and suffocating. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but anger was a flame licking at its edges. This was my place. My sanctuary. I wiped my hands on my apron, my movements deliberately slow and steady, and walked out from behind the counter. I faced the one closest to the door, a man with a thick neck and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" My voice was calmer than I felt. "Or are you just here to scare off my customers?" He didn't even blink. His eyes looked through me as if I were a pane of glass. "Someone will be here to speak with you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. We were told to wait. The waiting was a form of torture. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock on the wall a hammer blow against my nerves. The four men remained as motionless as statues, their presence a suffocating weight that had pressed all the warmth and life out of my little cafe. Maya had retreated to the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes, but I could see her trembling reflection in the chrome of the espresso machine. I stood my ground in the middle of the room, my arms crossed, refusing to let them see me cower. Finally, a vehicle even more imposing than the one from last night slid to a stop outside. It was a black Rolls-Royce, its windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness. One of the men inside moved to open the cafe door, a gesture of synchronized deference. The man who entered was the reason words like power existed. He was tall, around 35, with sharp, intelligent features that were almost cruelly handsome. His black suit was a masterpiece of tailoring, fitting his broad shoulders and lean frame perfectly. His dark hair was styled with effortless precision, and his eyes, as dark and cold as a winter night, swept across the room before landing on me. They held no warmth, only a chilling, analytical intensity. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, an unnerving silence in his steps. The air crackled around him. This was a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. His very presence demanded submission. He stopped a few feet from me, his head tilting slightly as he assessed me from head to toe. I felt exposed, dissected by that clinical gaze. I lifted my chin, refusing to be intimidated. "You've scared off my business and terrified my employee," I said, my voice tight. "You have 60 seconds to tell me what this is about before I call the police." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a cold, humorless expression that did not reach his eyes. "The police?" he repeated, the words sounding like an amusing, foreign concept. "I assure you, they would not be interested in our conversation." He gestured dismissively to his men. "My name is Jean Wu Quan. I'm here regarding an interaction you had yesterday with an elderly gentleman." The name meant nothing to me, but his tone was not one of gratitude. It was possessive, almost accusatory, as if my simple act of kindness had been a breach of some unspoken law, an intrusion into a world where I did not belong. "I helped a man who was caught in the rain." I clipped out, my temper flaring. "If you've come to thank me, this is a very strange way of doing it. Gratitude is a simple emotion," he said, his voice smooth and low, yet it carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "My family's affairs are rarely simple. You involved yourself, however briefly, in our business. My father was impressed, and that has consequences. He took another step closer, invading my personal space, and I could smell the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne and something else, something dangerous and metallic, like cold steel. He has requested your services, Jean Wu said, his eyes locking onto mine. It is not a request you will be refusing. The phrase requested your services hung in the air between us, thick with unspoken meaning. My mind raced through a dozen terrifying possibilities, each worse than the last. Was this some kind of twisted protection racket? Did they think I had something they wanted? I stared at Jean Wu Quan, at his handsome, impassive face, and saw nothing but the calm certainty of a man who had never been told no in his life. The power rolling off him was an invisible, crushing force. I run a cafe, I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts to keep it steady. I sell coffee and pastries. What possible services could a man like your father want from me? Jean Wu's cold expression didn't waver. My father, he stated, his voice dropping into a more serious, almost somber register, is the head of our family. He is also dying. The doctors have given him 3 months, perhaps less. The bluntness of the statement shocked me into silence. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was merely stating a fact, a piece on a chessboard. His health is failing, Jean Wu continued, and his tastes have become simple. He was deeply moved by your unprompted kindness, a quality he finds in short supply. He was also, as he put it, extremely impressed by your almond pastry. He paused, letting the absurdity of the statement sink in. The entire hostile takeover of my cafe, the 4 terrifying men, the Rolls-Royce, was about a pastry? It felt insane, like a scene from a movie. For the next 3 months, he declared, his gaze unwavering, you'll be responsible for preparing my father's meals. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Simple, wholesome food. The kind of food you make here. He wants a taste of a normal life, a connection to something genuine before he dies. That is his wish. It was an offer wrapped in the language of a command, a cage disguised as a compliment. It sounded so innocent, so charitable on the surface, but the implications were horrifying. It meant being tied to these people, to their dark and dangerous world. It meant my life was no longer my own. A sense of vertigo washed over me, as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me. My sense of security, so carefully built over years of hard work, shattered on the floor like a dropped plate. And if I say no, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. For the first time, Jean Wu's expression shifted. The coldness in his eyes intensified, becoming something truly menacing. My father's wishes are my commands. And you, Ms. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You are now one of his wishes. Refusal would be unwise. It would be seen as a great disrespect.
To me.
To my father. To our entire family. You do not want to disrespect my family. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a promise, delivered with a chilling calm of absolute certainty. He reached into his jacket and placed a single, heavy black card on the counter. It had a name and a number, nothing else. My driver will arrive at 7 a.m. tomorrow for the first meal. Do not be late. He turned and walked out, his 4 men falling into formation behind him, leaving me alone in the deafening silence of my violated sanctuary. The first rays of dawn felt like an intrusion, pale fingers of light probing the shadows of my sleepless night. My little cafe, once a source of pride and comfort, now felt like a gilded cage. I had arrived at 3 a.m., hours before my usual start, driven by a nervous energy that made it impossible to rest. The 4 men were already there, standing on the sidewalk across the street, their dark forms like crows waiting for a carcass. They were a permanent fixture now, a constant, silent declaration that my life was no longer my own. Maya had called me late last night, her voice trembling as she quit. I couldn't blame her. No amount of money was worth the kind of fear that had seeped into our little shop. So I was alone, the familiar tasks of measuring flour and simmering stock feeling alien and fraught with a new, terrible significance. I wasn't just making food. I was paying a tithe, a tribute to a world I wanted no part of. What do you cook for a dying Mafia patriarch? I settled on what I knew best: comfort, honesty. A simple congee, simmered for hours until the rice was creamy and soft, seasoned with ginger and a light chicken broth. I packed it carefully into insulated containers, along with a soft-boiled egg and the almond pastry that had started all of this. My hands were steady, my focus absolute. The cooking was my anchor, the one thing I could control in a world that had suddenly spun wildly out of my grasp. At precisely 7 a.m., a black town car, different from the others, pulled up to the curb. A driver, as grim and silent as the bodyguards, stepped out, took the bags from me without a word, and drove away. The transaction was cold, sterile, and terrifying. The rest of the morning was a blur of forced normalcy. A few brave regulars came in, but they didn't linger, their conversations stilted as they glanced nervously at the sentinels outside. By noon, the cafe was empty. I was wiping down the counter for the 100th time when the bell chimed. It was Jinwoo. He was alone this time, and the absence of his entourage made his presence feel even more concentrated, more potent. He wore a gray suit today, the fabric shimmering under the lights. He stopped in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the empty tables. "It seems your business has suffered," he observed, his tone neutral. "You did this," I replied, my voice raw with resentment. "This is on you," he ignored the accusation. "My father enjoyed the meal," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a report. He said it was calming. He took a few steps toward the counter, his gaze finally meeting mine. For a brief, unguarded moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't warmth, not exactly. It was more like a weary acknowledgement, a flash of shared burden. "There are rules," he said, his voice returning to its usual cold, commanding tone. "You will prepare the food. You will give it to my driver. You will have no other contact with my father. You will not speak to him. You will not ask him questions. Your role in this is to cook. Nothing more. Is that clear?" I nodded numbly, my throat tight. Why me? I finally asked the question that had been tormenting me. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? He looked away, his gaze settling on a crack in the plaster by the window. "My father is a man of particular principles. He believes your kindness was a sign, a moment of purity in a world that has none. He wants to keep that close as he prepares for his end." He looked back at me, his face an unreadable mask. "And I will deny him nothing." The words were a quiet confession of fierce, absolute loyalty, a glimpse into the hidden agenda that drove him. He was a son, trapped by duty, and in that moment, he was almost human. The days settled into a strange, suffocating rhythm. Morning, noon, and night I cooked. I poured all my fear, my anger, and my confusion into the food. I made hearty beef stews that simmered for hours, their rich aroma filling the empty cafe with a ghost of its former life. I baked soft milk bread, kneaded until my knuckles were sore, a physical outlet for my trapped energy. I created vibrant salads and delicate fish dishes, each a silent, defiant act of creation in the face of the destruction of my peace. Every meal was a message, though I wasn't sure who it was for. Perhaps for the old man, a reminder of a world outside his gilded cage. Or perhaps it was for myself, a way to prove I was still a chef, a creator, and not just a prisoner. The drivers came and went like clockwork, their faces impassive, their silence absolute. The 4 bodyguards remained a permanent fixture across the street, a constant, living symbol of my captivity. Jinwoo's visits became a regular occurrence. He would appear in the late afternoons, when the light was soft and the cafe was at its most desolate. He never said he was there to check on me, but we both knew he was. He would sit at the counter, the same spot every time, and order a black coffee. He drank it slowly, his dark eyes watching my every move as I cleaned or prepped for the next meal. Our conversations were sparse, clipped exchanges that felt more like strategic maneuvers than a sharing of words. He would ask about the ingredients I was using, his questions sharp and intelligent. I would answer in monosyllables, refusing to give him any more of myself than was absolutely necessary. But the silence between the words began to change. It was no longer just empty and hostile. It grew thick with unspoken things. One afternoon, as I was zesting a lemon, the sharp, clean scent filling the air, He spoke without looking at me. My mother used to love that smell, he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the cavernous silence of the cafe. She had a small lemon tree on our balcony. It was the only thing she ever grew. I stopped what I was doing, stunned by the unexpected crack in his armor. It was the first personal detail he had ever offered, a tiny, humanizing glimpse behind the iron curtain of his control. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and resumed my work, but the dynamic had shifted. I started watching him more closely, noticing the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way he would rub the back of his neck when he thought I wasn't looking. I saw a man carrying an impossible weight, a son shackled by a duty he seemed to both honor and resent. And in his gaze, I began to see something else, something beyond the cold assessment of a warden. I saw a flicker of grudging respect, and perhaps something more. A dangerous, unwelcome curiosity that mirrored my own. The routine shattered a month into my sentence. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was packing up the dinner, a simple roasted chicken with root vegetables, when Jinwoo walked in. He wasn't wearing one of his immaculate suits. Instead, he was in a simple black sweater and dark trousers, a casual attire that somehow made him look even more imposing, as if he were shedding a uniform. There was a new tension in his posture, a coiled energy that set my nerves on edge. "There's a change of plans," he said, his voice clipped. "You won't be sending the meal tonight." My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it over? Was I free? A wild, foolish hope flared within me. "My father wishes to thank you in person," he continued, extinguishing the hope as quickly as it had appeared. "You'll be having dinner at our home." Tonight, my blood ran cold. The thought of entering their world, the heart of their power, was terrifying. My cafe was my territory, a place where I still had the illusion of control. Their home would be the lion's den. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes hardened. It was not a request. "Be ready in an hour." There was no room for argument. An hour later, I was sitting in the back of the Rolls-Royce, the leather seats feeling cold and alien against my skin. I had changed out of my flour-dusted work dress and into the nicest thing I owned, a simple, dark blue dress. It felt woefully inadequate as we passed through a set of imposing iron gates and drove up a long, winding driveway. The house wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a modern monolith of glass and dark stone that loomed against the night sky. It was stunningly beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth, a monument to wealth and power. Jinwoo met me at the door and led me through vast, echoing hallways that felt more like an art gallery than a home. The air was still and cool, and my footsteps were silent on the polished marble floors. The dining room was immense, dominated by a long, dark wood table that could have seated 30. Tonight, only 3 places were set. The old man, Mr. Kwan, sat at the head of the table. He looked even more frail than I remembered, lost in the high-backed chair, but his eyes were just as sharp. He smiled warmly as I entered, a genuine, grandfatherly expression. The artist has arrived," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "My dear, please sit. Forgive an old man's sentimentality, but I had to meet the woman whose cooking has brought me more comfort than any doctor." Dinner was served by silent staff. It was an elaborate, multi-course meal, the kind of food I could never afford, but it all tasted like ash in my mouth. Mr. Kwan was a charming host, telling stories and asking me about my life about the cafe. He spoke of kindness and integrity as the highest virtues, and I felt a dizzying sense of cognitive dissonance. How could this gentle, philosophical old man be the source of the fear that now ruled my life? All the while, Jinwoo sat in silence, his face a mask, watching the exchange between his father and me. He was a spectator at his own father's carefully orchestrated play, and I was the unwitting lead actress. After the dessert plates were cleared, a nurse appeared and gently helped Mr. Kwan to his feet. He was tired, she explained softly. He paused beside my chair, placing a cool, dry hand on my shoulder. "You have a strong spirit, Zola," he said, his sharp eyes holding mine. "It is a rare and valuable thing. Do not let this world break it." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cavernous room with Jinwoo. The silence he left behind was heavier than before, charged with everything that had been left unsaid. Jinwoo stared into his untouched glass of wine, his jaw tight. "That was a performance," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "He wanted something from me." Jinwoo finally looked up, his eyes dark with a complex mix of anger and resignation. "He always wants something," he said, his voice low and bitter. "You're right. It was a performance. For you, for the staff, for anyone who might be watching. Everything is a message." He stood up and walked over to the vast window that overlooked the glittering, indifferent city lights. "You asked why you. My father believes in symbols. He is dying, and his world is preparing for the chaos that will follow. There are rivals, vultures, who think his time has made him weak. He wanted to show them he is still in control, still capable of bringing a complete unknown, an innocent, into the very heart of his world. It's a show of absolute power. The truth of it settled over me, cold and heavy. I wasn't a person to them. I was a symbol, a pawn in a game I never knew I was playing. So the kindness, the pastry, it was all a lie?" "No," he said, turning back to face me. "That was the one true part. It's what gave him the idea. He was genuinely touched by your kindness. But my father is a master strategist. He takes a piece of truth and builds a fortress around it. He used your genuine goodness for his own purposes. To create a story, a message of stability to his enemies and his allies. He took a step closer, and for the first time, I felt like he was speaking to me, Zola, not the symbol. He did not understand the consequences for you. Or perhaps he did not care. Now that you have been seen here, now that you are publicly associated with him, you are no longer an unknown. You are part of the story. And his enemies may decide to make you a target to send a message back to him. To me, the full weight of my situation finally crashed down on me. I had thought my prison was the cafe, my sentence the 3 months of cooking. But my real prison was my new identity in their world, and my sentence was indefinite. I had been branded. The fear I felt before was a pale imitation of the terror that now gripped me. I was no longer just a captive, I was a target. The final weeks of the 3-month period were a descent into a new kind of hell. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension. The bodyguards outside my cafe were no longer just a passive presence. They were alert, their eyes constantly scanning the street, their hands never far from the inside of their jackets. Jinwoo's visits became more frequent, but they were shorter, more intense. The mask of cold indifference was gone, replaced by a raw, simmering anxiety that he barely kept in check. He would pace the length of my empty cafe, his phone buzzing incessantly, his conversations clipped and brutal. He was a man fighting a war on multiple fronts, and I was a vulnerable, undefended piece of his territory. I continued to cook, the routine, the only thing keeping me sane. Each meal I sent off felt like a prayer for the old man's peaceful end, because I knew his death would be the trigger for the chaos Jinwoo had predicted. The end came on a rainy Wednesday night, almost 3 months to the day since the old man had first walked into my cafe. I was boxing up a simple fish soup when the door burst open. It was Jinwoo, but he was a version of himself I had never seen. His hair was disheveled, his suit jacket was gone, and there was a dark, ugly bruise high on his cheekbone. His eyes were wild with a fury that was terrifying to behold. "He's gone," he said, his voice a raw rasp. "My father's dead." Before I could process the words, he grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "We have to go." Now, he pulled me toward the door, but we were too late. The sound of shattering glass exploded behind us as the front window of my cafe imploded. My sanctuary, my dream, was being destroyed. Men in dark clothes were pouring out of a van, wielding bats and crowbars, smashing everything in sight. It was a calculated, brutal message. An attack on me to provoke him. In that moment, seeing the ruins of my life, something inside me snapped. Fear gave way to a white-hot rage. But Jinwoo's reaction was even more potent. He shoved me behind him, shielding me with his body, and a sound came from his throat, a low, guttural snarl of pure, unrestrained fury. His men, the silent sentinels, materialized from the shadows, and the street descended into a swift, violent clash I couldn't bear to watch. He dragged me out the back door and into a waiting car, the sounds of the fight fading behind us. He took me to a sterile, anonymous apartment high in a skyscraper, a place that was clearly a safe house. He paced the room like a caged tiger while I sank onto the sofa, trembling. "This is my fault," he said, stopping in front of me, his voice choked with self-loathing. "I brought this into your life. I put you in danger." He looked at me, and all the power, all the control, had been stripped away, leaving only a raw, desperate man. "They will not stop. Now that my father is gone, they will see you as my weakness. A way to get to me." He took a deep breath, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I can make you disappear. A new name, a new life, anywhere in the world you want to go. You'll have enough money to never have to worry again. You can be free of this." He was offering me an escape, a way out of the nightmare he had created. I could go back to being anonymous, safe. I could have a normal life again. But as I looked at him, at the man standing before me, bruised and bleeding for me, I realized the thought of leaving felt like its own kind of death. The choice was mine, to run and forget, or to stay and face the fire. I looked around the cold, impersonal room, a gilded cage far more luxurious than my cafe, but infinitely more confining. I thought of the life he was offering me, a life of running, of looking over my shoulder, a life bought with money that was likely stained with violence. Then I looked at Jinwoo. I saw the guilt warring with a fierce protectiveness in his eyes. In the ruins of my cafe, amidst the terror, he hadn't hesitated to shield me. He had stood between me and the world he had dragged me into. My old life was gone, shattered like the front window of my shop. Running would not bring it back. It would only mean letting the forces that destroyed it win. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, resonating with a certainty that surprised even me. "I'm not running. This is my city. That was my cafe. You don't get to destroy my life and then pay me off to sweep the pieces under a rug somewhere else." His head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Zola, you don't understand. Staying here, with me, it's a death sentence. My life as I knew it is already over." I countered, standing up to face him, my fear finally giving way to a defiant strength I didn't know I possessed. "The only choice I have left is how I live the one I have now. I won't live it as a coward alone." Heavy silence stretched between us. He searched my face, looking for any sign of hesitation, of fear. He found none. A slow, weary sigh escaped his lips, and some of the fight seemed to go out of him, replaced by a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. "Your kindness," he whispered, more to himself than to me, "is going to get you killed. It's the only thing I have left that's truly mine," I replied. "And I won't let you, or them, take it from me." In the days that followed, the city held its breath. The news reported on a series of gang-related incidents, a sanitized term for the brutal, silent war Jinwoo was waging against his rivals. He was rarely at the safe house, but when he returned, he was a ghost, bearing new bruises and a deeper exhaustion that seemed to settle into his very bones. He was consolidating his father's empire, securing his position as the new head of the family, and he was doing it with a ruthless efficiency that both terrified and fascinated me. After the storm passed, he came to me. The war was over. He had won. He looked older, his face leaner, the last traces of the arrogant man who had first walked into my cafe gone forever. He took me not to the ruins of my shop, but to the top floor of a new building overlooking the city, a space of clean lines and wide-open windows. "The cafe is gone," he said, his voice filled with a quiet regret. "I can't give that back to you. The life you had, it's gone. But I want to build a new one. With you, it wasn't a proposal born of romantic fantasy. It was a declaration from a man who had stared into the abyss and had chosen to climb out. He wasn't offering me a fairy tale. He was offering me a partnership in a dangerous, uncertain world. He was the cold, calculating Mafia boss, a king in a kingdom of shadows. I was the waitress who had offered a moment of warmth to a lonely old man. Our paths should never have crossed, yet they had become irrevocably intertwined. My simple act of kindness had not been repaid with money or simple gratitude. It had been repaid with the destruction of my world and the offer of a new one, a world of immense power and constant danger, at the side of a man I had come to see not as a monster, but as a prisoner of his own legacy. And as I looked out at the city lights, I knew there was no going back. I took his hand. It wasn't an ending. It was a new, terrifying, and unpredictable beginning.